The title is Teacher Leadership, Awakening the Sleeping Giant in Kazakhstan. So why we have got interested in this topic? Because we think that, as you can see right now, you can witness, there are lots of changes. I don't want this to say the word transform, but there are lots of changes, sweeping changes going on right now in Kazakhstan as the country makes a transition from the post-Soviet times to modern days. So the presentation overview that we have, we'll start from methodology, then we'll talk about recent reforms and driving forces for teacher leadership, and then identifying challenges for teacher leadership specific to Kazakhstan, and we'll discuss social, cultural particularities and features of the Kazakhstani context when we talk about this concept of teacher leadership, and some implications with recommendations. And so I'd like to also acknowledge that this is the part of the collaborative international project that we have with the University of Cambridge Faculty of Education. And it's been a 3-year long-term project. We've been doing this for 3 years already, and at the first stage we wanted to explore how reforms which generate from the Ministry of Education travel from the center to periphery. So from Astana to some rural, imagine a rural school somewhere in northeast Kazakhstan, which are particularly heavy to access due to some infrastructure, or especially in winter conditions, or just because they're rural schools. So how reforms travel from center to the rural areas. So this was the first stage of reform of the research that we have. And the second stage that we looked then from bottom up, how teachers, school principals and students perceive the reforms that they are getting. So do they have a say when we try to implement these reforms, when we try to introduce, for example, e-learning or multilingual education? And how do they perceive and how do they cope with these reforms on their grounds with the facilities and resources that they have right now? So this was a big, large project, and when you do international project, it's very important to have this balance that you want to explore your own because you are part of the team, and other members from Cambridge or US, or they want to explore their own. So we have these agendas, different agendas, and there is also a subjectivity of every researcher in the team. So we try to explore different cross-cutting themes. And so I will have my questions for teacher leadership. I will list these interview questions for my topic, and you are part of the team and you will help me to collect this data too. So we break up into groups. I go to Shymkent, you go to Pavlodar, and we have the same agenda. So I ask not only my questions, research questions, but also ask your questions. So this kind of helps this to have shared understanding of the research. So we had this strategy when we started to work with Cambridge. So I also need to acknowledge that this long-term project has been funded by the Ministry of Education and Science, and it's more over research that the Ministry would like to see what happens on the ground, from how to get away from the so-called Astana effect and how to explore the reforms, traveling reforms. So then we came up with the research questions. So the first research question was talking about concept of teacher leadership, which, as you may know, has originated from the more of a British, North American, Australian context. If you peruse the documents in Kazakhstani teacher education, you will hardly ever see such a concept of teacher leadership per se. So these have been predominantly originated in the West. And can these ideas of teacher leadership be applicable to other social contexts? And then more specifically, in what ways does social cultural context affect expanding practices of teacher leadership in Kazakhstan. Hello. And the third research question that we have is, what are the ways for making teacher leadership reform more context sensitive and more effective? Right? And then we came up with methodology which was basically relying on interviews and focus groups, and we also had documentation analysis, and we also had different categories of participants as respondents. So we had principals, deputy principals, teachers and students. And then we also had regional authorities, which we call transmitting institutions. So they are the ones who transmit the reforms taken from the center, from the Ministry of Education to schools. So there's a ministry, but there's also regional departments of education offices on the oblast level, on the rayon level, and on the city level. We also interviewed, we went further actually, so the assessment expert at the MAS Center, this was not part of the Cambridge NUGC project, but this was like between RLM and me, so we went further and we wanted to know what the experts of assessment are thinking about the reforms. And we also went further and interviewed teacher trainers who have just come to Kazakhstan like 2 or 3 years ago, and I started to work on the teacher development course at the Center of Excellence at the Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools. So regarding talking of schools, we try to cover different types of schools, and there's a law about education which classifies types of schools. So we have a city comprehensive school. So there is primary, secondary education schools. We call them secondary schools, but they also include primary classes. And so we also had larger rural schools. They're the ones which are based at the outskirts of the city, but they're not that far away. So they're not like real auls, they're not real villages. But at the same time, we also had small rural schools and multi-graded small-size schools. So there's a term multi-graded. It's also called ungraded because you mix year 4 with year 5 because there are not many children studying in year 5. So they will be mixing up and teaching. You will be teaching them together. And teachers also, they could teach maths and, I don't know, some geography or geography and biology, different classes. So there's also a shortage of teachers at such schools. But I miss gymnasiums. So there are gymnasiums, and if you know, there is a network of gifted education schools called Darin Network. So this gymnasium, they belong to Darin Network. So what is teacher leadership? If we ask a question about teacher leadership, we will probably have different understandings and different conceptualizations and meanings in this audience and beyond. And we decided that there is no uniform definition. It's an emergent concept. So please don't take it as an excuse that we don't want to have some uniform definition here. But at the same time, literature says that you don't want to narrow down the uniform definition of teacher leadership to some limited wording or conceptualization. But for us, it's more if you're a teacher, a leader, then you have that power, and you have that sense of enthusiasm that you want to bring about positive changes to your social context, to your school, to your environment. And then we also follow in the footsteps of Lawrence Stenhouse, who said that when you try to implement reforms, first of all, go and talk to teachers. And the quote says, it is the teachers in the end who will change the world of the school by understanding it. So why The Sleeping Giant? This is also one of the classics, one of the books on teacher leadership. Katzen and May and Morley who think that there's lots of resources that the teacher, as a decision maker, as a reformer, or as a classroom researcher who can bring about changes because they're insiders rather than some outsiders beyond the school. So this also raises a question when you try to implement such abrupt, swift changes like starting to teach English from year one last September. How many teachers have been surveyed and how many teachers you have talked to when you have decided to implement multilingual education in schools? Then, well, it's also when you try to explore such concepts which are traveling from other contexts to given context, you try to explore what's happening on the ground. So if we go back to the post-era in the 1990s, then it's visible, and we call them cold 1990s, and some people who have been teaching during that time can relate to this, when there was a big challenge of being a teacher, because the social status of the teacher was kind of low at that time. And national economy was kind of reflecting the status. So there was not many opportunities to have some CPD courses for school teachers. Even on the higher education level, I guess, it happens that if you want to join some courses then, or conferences, then you have to pay for yourself. There's also little engagement with international consultancy, and this has been pointed out in the state program for 2005-2010, when policymakers say that we need to go out, we need to talk to other policymakers in different other countries and see how CPD, what kind of CPD models they follow, what kind of initial teacher education models they have. And this very state program says that back then there was an archaic image of the teacher, of the educator, as a mere source of transmitter of knowledge. And right now we can say that these values of going away from the teacher as a knower to more of a role of a teacher as a facilitator has been promoted and advanced up to the present day. So we gradually break away from this tradition of the I tell model to more of a we talk model and you explore model rather than this didactic approach to teaching. And as I said, as you probably noticed, there are lots of different interviews that we had in different regions. And I forgot to mention that we've been to different regions, south, north, east, west of Kazakhstan, different schools. And then we came up with cross-cutting themes and realized that many interview voices that we heard, they kind of coincide and they talk about different they have common observations of the system that's happening, system reform that's happening right now. And one of the calls that we put here, that we can't say that all we had previously was bad. We should keep the best traditions and add new skills and qualifications to teaching to improve the student, making him much freer and more liberated. It's one of the directors of the Center of Excellence, there will be lots of abbreviations, and COE stands for Center of Excellence, who brought this up, that you cannot say that the Soviet time was bad. In fact, when you talk about the Soviet, we don't imply that there are some negative connotations or negative implications with that concept. And so far, as there are so many reforms, someone needs to be in charge of this. It's not only policymakers in the Ministry of Education, but also teachers as agents of change and, if you want, conductors or implementers of the reform. So there is such a set of new reforms as autonomy at schools. It has been envisioned by the Ministry of Education that schools need to be autonomous, and they need to have board of trustees, and there need to be school council with more engagement of parents. There's also a sweeping reform of switching to 12-year schooling model. There is a famous program, e-learning reform. There's a multilingual education, Nazarbayev intellectual schools as a new player on the horizons of teacher education and secondary school in general. There are centers of excellence and centers for assessment and evaluation. So NAS they have their own centers. So Nazarbayev intellectual schools, they have their own centers which consider it to translate best practices of Nazarbayev intellectual schools to mainstream schools. So if there are like 20 or something Nazarbayev intellectual schools, then the idea is to transmit these best practices of Nazarbayev intellectual school to other schools. And with the establishment of the Center of Excellence and the Orleo Teacher Training Institutes, there is a new approach to CPD. So it's more level-based, and you have funding entitlement if you take one of the levels at the Teacher Training Institutes or Center of Excellence. And then we try to pin down some observations towards these reforms, and one of the interviews says that unfortunately we have specific orders and specific law and requirements under and in accordance with which we have to operate. So there are principals who want to introduce something interesting, and they can do this after discussion, but we have a specialized council where we discuss the issue. We have specialized council, we discuss the issue, and if such innovation meets our law's requirements, then it can be realized. So this lack of autonomy itself is a good example how teacher leadership could be hindered in this context. Then we also had the literature review and try to explore what authors talking about teacher leadership and what kind of model they suggest. And we realized that there's an idea by Silva et al. About 3 ways of teacher leadership. I'm sorry if the font is tiny. So Silva talks about the 3 waves, and the first one is that the first wave is more of a formal leadership when there is a positional leadership. So you'll be playing a formal role of the head teacher or a deputy teacher. And this was the first wave. And more of the second wave, when teachers have been given some liberty to change the curriculum, to use textbooks that they want, not prescribed by the law about education or by some list of books that they've been given by the ministry. So this was more of a freedom, more of academic freedom. And I've been a school teacher myself, and sometimes back in the 1990s, you had to say, when the school inspectors would come, you would have to say that you're using this book because it has been prescribed by the curriculum documentation. And then you keep the book at the right-hand corner of the desks of the children and your teacher's table, and then you will just keep there, and then keep the book there, and then you will just put out the other books that you want to use, some alternatives. But then you will teach the kids that when the inspectors come and talk to you, say, I'm using this book. So you have to say that. And this one of the moves that we had to do, because we liked this book but not that book, because they are more bright colors. There's a CD, voice CDs. So that's one of the anecdotal evidence I want to share with you when you're a teacher in the school. But now times are changing, and I think it's controversial, but some policymakers state that you can have an alternative to teach by any book that you want to teach by, because the law about education says so. So teachers started to have some freedom to take their own initiatives, and the third wave that teacher leadership is experiencing these days is more of navigating and navigating the structure of schools. So you can be agents of change within your school, and the language that we get from international consultancy is that there should be more autonomy, there should be a board of trustees, should be accountable, and have their own mission and role. And I think this is quite relevant for teacher leadership, when every teacher could be a leader and bring up their own changes to the schools. Then we try to confirm, try to see what teachers are saying about teacher leadership back then. And one of the quotes that we have that in the Soviet times, a teacher leader was someone who worked for teacher unions, and also it was someone who had enough competencies in his or her specialization, but mostly a deputy director was considered a teacher leader. So even now, if you make some literature review in local journals, you will see that there's lots of complaints going on from the school management that teachers are getting accustomed to relying more on deputy teachers. So this was one of the deputy teachers who will be for academic affairs, and he will be the one who decides how to teach and what to teach, how to change the curriculum. This also one of the legacies that we have, that not much room was for teachers to have their own say. And teachers themselves, they kind of got accustomed to it. And then in the second quote says that in Soviet times, a teacher leader was someone who worked as a mentor. So in Russian it's called like a nastavnik. But that mentor was supposed to help novice teachers. So they were the ones who would help neophytes with the first days at school. Every established teacher would be assigned to some novice teachers, and he would lead those novice teachers during the next 3 or 5 years. And then the third quote says that in addition to creating a beneficial psychological climate, it is necessary to create the conditions for creativity of teacher. And I'm a teacher myself, and I am the head teacher right now. In my years of teaching practice, when I didn't get what was given to me, so I'm trying to give it now to my teachers, to our teachers. So create and give it. We must give the teacher 3 days to do the minimum package load, and all these are important for the teacher.